conservative media, abandoning President Trump on two crucial issues. Number one, initially averting a government shutdown by not funding the border wall.
There are a lot of people who heard him last week who drew that line in the sand and said, this is where shutting down, and if there's not a shutdown, he's going to look like a loser.
This is textbook. It's a textbook example of what the drive-by media calls compromise. Trump gets nothing and the Democrats get everything.
I think that not funding the wall is going to go down as one of the worst things to have happened to this administration. Forget Mueller.
Did that help persuade the president to change course, producing a partial government shutdown? Number two, Trump's decision to quickly pull all American troops out of Syria, leading to the departure of Pentagon Chief Jim Mattis.
In a stunning and I think irresponsible move yesterday, the president blindsided his Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, people on the outside who have been advising him like General Jack Keane, as well as his State Department.
He looks like, in fact, that he is weak, that he's caving in, that he's bugging out. It sets up a foreign policy disaster.
Donald Trump wags the dog, and the world is less safe today after the dramatic resignation of the last human guardrail.
This is so frustrating to me. This is exactly what Barack Obama did.
Why have these issues sparked such criticism from conservative pundits who usually back Trump? Bill Bennett, who worked for Republican presidents, joins our discussion. The Beltway press was virtually certain that Mike Flynn would receive no jail time until a federal judge threatened to put the former national security advisor behind bars.
It's stunning to me that this judge, who has such a reputation of holding prosecutors to a high standard, would suddenly decide he is a member of the prosecution.
Frankly, I think that today was a really good day for the justice system and that this judge really did his job.
Don't you think that even at the White House and also, like I call them the Trumpettes, all over the country, their heads were blown up? They were so mad. All of us, they loved this judge when they thought that he would believe the conspiracy theories, right?
How did the media miscalculate the handling of Flynn's guilty plea, with some prognosticators even saying the case could be tossed out? Plus, a massive breach of trust by Facebook peddling access to your private messages. Has Mark Zuckerberg's company finally gone too far? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. With much of the government shut down at least through Christmas, with Defense Chief Jim Mattis leaving, with U.S. troops pulling out of Syria, with stock market sharply declining, the media are now pushing this narrative. As described by the Washington Post, Trump single-handedly propelled the U.S. government into crisis and set markets tumbling. Politico says Trump allies are privately expressing new levels of concern about the president's erratic behavior. Some pundits on the right joined in the criticism when the president agreed to a stopgap funding compromise with zero money from the wall. And under pressure from House conservatives, Trump then vowed not to sign any bill without that funding, leading to this weekend's partial shutdown. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist and a Fox News contributor. Sarah Fisher, media reporter for Axios. And Philippe Reines, a former State Department official under Hillary Clinton. Molly, some stories are saying we have a partial government shutdown because Donald Trump was cowed and coerced by conservative commentators on Fox, by Rush Limbaugh, by Ann Coulter, who hammered him for initially going along with that stopgap funding bill that wouldn't have funded the wall at all.
Well, and that's because Donald Trump himself said that he believed border security was important enough that if it weren't funded, if this wall weren't funded, he would take credit for a government shutdown. And then it sounded like maybe there was some backtracking on that. So absolutely conservative media pushed back because they wanted to make sure that he wasn't backtracking. And here we are. So it's a good reflection that the people's sentiment was somehow expressed in the media, either through conservative media or otherwise.
Interesting. So, Philippe, it's not every week that Fox and Friends, the president's favorite show, criticizes Trump. In this case, on both issues, Syria, which we'll get to, and the wall and the shutdown maneuvering. Is it that certain pundits on the right are so all-powerful, or are they seen as reflecting the views of Trump's base, which, as we know, are very important to him?
Well, from my perspective, as a Democrat who comes into the belly of the beast pretty often, it seems to me that what triggers Republican on Republican violence is usually immigration. And I think the problem is that Molly just touched on is that the president is not hardcore believer in much of anything to the extent that he has no problem coming off these things. So it happened with DACA, where you saw another one of these meetings where
you compromise and then we don't
compromise
yeah.
and don't, and you see the Republicans in the room are wincing, and you see it with Chuck and Nancy last week. And I think it brings up two. One is the conservative, but also brings that these are self-inflicted wounds. The president is so used to wanting cameras that he brings them into times that there shouldn't be cameras.
And speaking of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and Molly, you just referenced this. Question for you, Sarah. I want to play the soundbite that is being endlessly replayed by the media of that meeting less than 2 weeks ago.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck. I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
So now that the president is blaming the Democrats for the shutdown, the media kind of enjoying him being boxed in by his earlier words and the current partisan battle.
That's right, with some even comparing this to George H.W. Bush's read my lips, no new taxes. When you verbally promise something to the American people with cameras involved, you have to be ready for any kind of pushback when you go back from your word. And that's exactly what Donald Trump is facing right now, with his base and conservative members of the media saying, wait a minute, that's not what you just did and said last week.
The withdrawal of the 2,000 troops from Syria was portrayed in the press as kind of a shocker, but Trump did say during the campaign and since that, he is opposed to extended or endless military entanglements overseas. Is he up against essentially a media establishment that favors military intervention?
Absolutely, and we saw this. It's actually kind of a crisis. When you're seeing all these stories about pulling back our troop presence in Syria, you're getting nothing but quotes from people who think that we should have perpetual presence in Syria. Now, that is true that a lot of people in the foreign policy establishment all think the same way. They all supported, lengthy intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is on 17 years now.
Yes.
And they are for, now that we've accomplished our stated mission in Syria, they're trying to change the stated mission from military defeat of ISIS into enduring defeat of ISIS, which is something that could mean that we will be there for 17 years. So you're not getting a lot of diversity of viewpoint, and it's a serious problem, and it's something that media people need to make sure they're getting that viewpoint from people who don't believe in endless intervention in Syria.
And the president justified this by saying ISIS has been defeated or largely defeated. Seems to me liberals have to be restrained on this because Barack Obama, you worked in that administration, pulled out of Iraq, got hammered by the right for it, and he also in a way shared Donald Trump's aversion to endless war in these far-flung places.
I don't think this is high-minded of a debate about where the U.S. should be deployed. I think this is more simply about, first of all, it's congressional Republicans, which is basically Donald Trump's firewall, that he has on occasion basically dared to leave him, first with Charlottesville, then with now with this, but with the Saudi killing. He is leaving them no choice but to criticize him. I don't think that's an intervention or non-intervention thing. It is, don't trifle with the people who are doing your bidding, who have your back.
By that logic, he's also leaving certain conservative commentators with no choice, who believe in differently than he does on this.
I actually think one of the problems we've seen in media coverage has been this perception that Republicans only disagree with him. You have multiple senators who are supporting him, including Senator Mike Lee and Senators Rand Paul. You have people on both sides of the aisle who do not believe that we should have this perpetual presence.
So is it that the press is playing up the Lindsey Grahams and Bob Corkers who are denouncing Trump?
But even more than that, only 18% of Americans last year supported having troops in Syria. And Tim Kaine, my senator from Virginia, has been trying to get a new resolution passed to support this endless situation in Syria, and he's had no success. So I think this is a false narrative that's being perpetuated.
But don't belittle, Lindsey Graham said this is a stain on his presidency.
Lindsey Graham has never found a country he doesn't want to.
Okay, but Lindsey Graham golfs with the president. He is his biggest defender on Mueller. These are significant things. And there's a difference between Congress and the media.
Sorry, Sarah. Let me move on from Lindsey Graham to Jim Mattis.
Yes.
Because, look, widely respected. His leaving is a very big story. But is the press going a little overboard and portraying him as the last man standing between Donald Trump and the collapse of the Western Alliance?
Of course. We have a large Defense Department. We have a large defense infrastructure. However, he was viewed as one of the biggest sounding boards and one of the most fundamental rocks when it comes to foreign policy. And so him leaving does scare a lot of people. Going back to your point, though, about media and how they're taking a look at this, I was watching CNN this morning. They had Bob Corker on and they had Rand Paul on. I think that we have to make sure that we're watching each individual show and taking into account which views they put on. It's not always so one-sided.
And just one other thing I want to mention, not all the media coverage has been bad. I think it was a CNN story or somewhere where I read that 8 months ago, Donald Trump told General Mattis, we need to be out of Syria within 6 months. 8 months ago. So learning some of the context of this
But this isn't
situation
about
that
Syria.
Trump, who has been for years saying we need to get out of Syria.
I want to take a look at the bigger picture. I didn't know about the 18% supporting remaining in Syria. Things are pretty volatile. It's been a pretty rough week. Washington's pretty rattled. New York is rattled. What about the media just making this all one big bowl of Trumpian chaos? I'm watching the banners on CNN and MSNBC, and they're all like, shutdown looms as Mattis resigns as stock market tanks, or stock market tanks as Mattis resigns as shutdown looms. And CNN's favorite is Trump tailspin. What do you make of it's all Trump?
With the stock market, the idea that the Fed's action this week doesn't play a role in that is
raising interest rates.
Even when you take the issue on the shutdown, yes, it is true that Donald Trump is forcing this issue. It's also true that it's been forced by inaction among both parties, both houses, and this is something that you can that by noticing it doesn't mean you're the cause of the problem. By saying we finally have to deal with it doesn't mean you're the cause of the problem. It just means you're saying this has to get done.
Philippe, is the coverage of the Syrian pullout influenced by the fact that essentially Trump style? He did this against the advice of many White House aides. He overruled Mattis. He didn't tell his congressional allies. He didn't tell allies in foreign capitals. And so does that add to the media sense of alarm?
I think when you couple Syria with the firing of Mattis, because they really are the same thing, you have this dynamic that I don't subscribe to, that Jim Mattis was some kind of like blankie where it made everyone feel better at night, and it shouldn't have. And I think there's some psychology going on.
Now, four-star general who believes in the defense alliances.
Sure.
That
2 weeks ago, he went up to the Senate Intelligence Committee and said there was no connection between the killing and their intelligence.
Well, I'm not saying you have to agree with everything Mattis does.
No, but I'm saying that to have vested so much in him as this last line of defense against Trump, I think is more about the people saying that than the reality of it.
Do the media, Sarah, reflect the foreign policy establishment's view on many of these issues? We saw this, Molly alluded to this, Afghanistan, Iraq, now Syria, that more military intervention, more troops is better, it's a good fight against terrorism, and less reflecting the views maybe of many Trump supporters, which is, why are we spending American tax dollars to constantly be in these places for decades?
I think absolutely. When you bring on tons of foreign policy experts to talk about what the implications are for diplomacy for us in doing something like that, but you're not bringing on moms and dads of people who are waiting for their kids to come home, I do think it does skew the coverage in that bit to be a little bit more
not just that, but there are many foreign policy leaders who actually do support this idea, and you want to bring in those voices as well as average Americans.
Yes, and to your point, though,
but including Congress.
Yeah, but there are people from Congress.
There are people in Congress who also don't believe we should be in Syria.
But they were all taken by surprise.
And if they wanted to be there, they could very easily pass a resolution saying we should be there.
But if you're going to criticize Barack Obama for sort of just putting us in there and not having enough of a discussion about it, you can't say that Donald Trump had an adequate discussion about pulling out. It's not as simple as keeping a campaign promise.
To get to a break, this debate is not over by any means. Ahead, Bill Bennett joins us on how the president is at the center of these political wars and also the culture wars. When we come back, miscalculating on Mueller. And the media blew it over the Mike Flynn sentencing. In the run-up to Mike Flynn's sentencing, virtually all the journalists and the pundits and the analysts thought the one-time White House official would easily avoid a jail term for lying to the FBI. And some conservative commentators argued the FBI had entrapped him.
Almost everyone thought this would be simple. In, out, no jail time.
We all thought that General Flynn was going to get sentenced today and that it would probably be just a little bit of time. But oh no, something very different happened.
Which invites the question, why is a guy who told the truth being charged with the crime of lying?
Judge Sullivan can throw out this guilty plea if he concludes the FBI intentionally interfered with their target, Flynn's constitutional right to counsel.
If you watched Fox for the last 72 hours, there was this expectation that this judge was going to make a martyr out of Flynn.
Well, not all of Fox, but federal judge Emmett Sullivan said he was disgusted by Flynn's comment, telling him, arguably, you sold your country out. He made clear that Flynn was likely to get some jail time, but allowed him a postponement so he could further cooperate with prosecutors. And Molly, whether you agree or disagree with what the judge did, the media left, right, and center were just, as we saw, shocked and amazed that Mike Flynn didn't have a quickie hearing with no jail time.
Right. I do want to point out that Judge Sullivan did immediately walk back those comments. He said he sort of said he was trying to make a hypothetical argument, and he apologized for that. And I think that's important to mention. This is a very complicated case, and I think what Mike Flynn's lawyers were trying to do was point out that he'd been pressured into accepting a plea deal for something that he probably didn't do to avoid all of his other legal problems. The judge in this case has a long reputation of being someone who says, if you plead to something, you better have done it. And so he gave them every opportunity to pull back on their plea. They didn't do it. He was really testing the boundaries of that plea agreement, and I think a lot of people didn't understand what was happening. But yeah, so now we don't have sentencing for another 90 days.
You know, Flynn, even some liberals in the media sounded sympathetic to Flynn. Career military man, he cooperated early, he doesn't deserve jail time, and I think that may have clouded their view of what was going on.
I think, I have to be honest, I was nervous about Sullivan's ruling. I've had a little bit of experience with him because he was the judge, one of the judges in Hillary Clinton's email matter, and was very tough on her. And when he asked to see the FBI notes, it seemed like, he's buying into this notion. But the flip side is, he then saw everything that we can't see and had a very strong reaction. But on a larger point, as a crisis communications point, I don't understand why the White House, the president in particular, has ever veered from no collusion. It is the most effective thing he ever says. Why that umbrella ever expands to Manafort, to Flynn, to any of these guys, it was setting themselves up
But
for
it expands
disappointment.
in part because this Mueller probe has not found any collusion.
But just say, look,
but
I
it's
don't-
going on to all these other places.
I don't know what these people are doing. I know what I didn't do.
Let me get Sarah in
Don't
here.
say he wasn't here that much. Or
Okay, so was this a bit of media groupthink? Because everyone in our world, our bubble, said, yeah, you know, prosecution agrees, defense agrees, you won't get jail time, you cooperated. And the judge comes in and he's looking not only at this narrow question of lying to the FBI or not, but other crimes that Flynn wasn't charged with. For example, illegal lobbying for Turkey. And he's a senior White House official, and he says, hey, he sees a much darker picture than in a way it was portrayed by the press.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the press was dumbfounded to see something that we probably should have been better prepared to see. I mean, look, at the end of the day, as you mentioned, the judge has insight into some of these things that we don't have insight into. And by the way, we've seen surprising judge rulings for months now coming out of this administration. So we should be prepared always to have some sort of surprise ruling. I think when you hear things like what we just heard with Chris Cuomo, that this is going to be a damning ruling based off of what the judge said today, that's going overboard as well. We still don't know what he knows, and so we just have to be prepared to acknowledge anything.
And also because of this judge, we now got to see some of these 302s that Congress has been trying and failing to see.
These
and
are
so
the
we
FBI
did get some
forms of
transparency.
FBI
And
records.
it does pose some pretty difficult questions about what
so
the FBI was
on
doing.
that point-
if anything, they went overboard to say, are you sure that's what it was? Wanting to give him a hand.
Well, look, there was a Wall Street Journal editorial titled "The Flynn Entrapment," and that many conservative commentators on Fox and elsewhere made the case that Flynn either didn't lie or the FBI had set a perjury trap. When Flynn's lawyers made that argument, it backfired.
Well, it did, but the underlying facts are true. We had a criminal leak, an illegal criminal leak of a phone call that Mike Flynn had with an ambassador from Russia that never had any wrongdoing in it. That was leaked to the Washington Post. No one's even been investigated for that, much less prosecuted. The day before the FBI went to interview him, and why were they interviewing him? They leaked to the Washington Post that he was in no legal jeopardy. They suggested that he was in no legal jeopardy. They encouraged him not to have attorneys there. These are all types of behavior that are inappropriate. James Comey himself admitted he got away with it. This is not what you want to hear
But
from
whether
your top
they're
law
inappropriate
enforcement
or
agency.
not,
I think it's diminishing. I mean, Molly is good at what she does, but this is diminishing what Flynn actually did. Flynn is someone who, as soon as the inauguration, was standing on the podium making deals on his text message. He should
I
not
agree.
have
That's
been,
not what he's charged with, though. That's what's kind of interesting.
He is charged with lying. You know what? It's bad to lie to the FBI.
You should never lie to any
public
federal
service
prosecutor.
messages. If you're looking at home, don't lie to the FBI. It's not a good
For
idea.
instance, when Hillary Clinton said she didn't know how classified systems worked, and yet the FBI decided not to prosecute
that's not a
that.
lie.
All right, you two can have to take this outside because I want to talk to Sarah. So some of the mainstream media are kind of selling this as a repudiation of the whole deep state theory, you know, that people are being railroaded like Mike Flynn. But it is a case of somebody who did, after all, lie to the FBI, pleaded to lying to the FBI. And this notion of, well, he didn't know. I mean, he's a former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He knows something.
Three-star military general.
Yeah.
Highest national security post next to the president.
Right.
You know not to lie to the FBI. In fact, those reports that he was, kind of happy and his demeanor seemed so honest, it means that, quite frankly, to me, Flynn did something wrong in lying to the FBI. He might not have even realized at the time what he was doing, but it doesn't undermine what Sullivan was saying that it's wrong.
Molly had more words, but she can take it up on Twitter. All right, Philippe Bryant is Sarah Fisher. Molly Hemingway, great to see you as always. Ahead, some prominent journalists canceling their Facebook accounts after the latest ethics outrage. Can the social network recover from this one? But up next, CBS isn't paying Les Moonves a penny as another famous accuser emerges. And the latest poll to attack a major news outlet is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Stay with us. It's official. CBS won't pay Les Moonves a penny of the $120 million in severance he wanted after being ousted as chairman. The board says he was fired for cause, both because of a pattern of sexual misconduct and for misleading outside investigators hired by the network. Moonves told the newsletter this is far from over, and CBS has actually been obligated to pay his legal fees, expected to run into the millions. Meanwhile, yet another high-profile accuser has now come forward. Actress Sybil Shepherd says her show was taken off the air in the 90s after she rejected his advances.
How soon after that, then, did you find that you were having issues with the series?
Quite shortly afterwards.
No kidding. Mm-hmm. Unbelievable.
While Moonves might eventually force CBS to cough up some cash, the optics of giving him a big payout after these kinds of revelations would be truly awful for the network. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, may be a media darling, but she's not shy about sticking it to the press. Politico had reported that, according to unnamed sources, she had recruited an African-American to potentially mount a primary challenge to the number 5 House Democrat, Hakeem Jeffries. Ocasio-Cortez ripped the media outlet on Twitter. Quote, "One disappointment about D.C. is the gossip that masquerades as reporting. This story has not a single named or verifiable source, only one on-the-record comment, which is a denial. My dad had a name for junk articles like this, birdcage lining." Gossip, birdcage lining, who does that remind you of? Political spokesman Brad Dayspring responded, "It's hard to know what the criticism of the piece is since the Congresswoman-elect doesn't specify, nor has she or anyone from her staff asked for a correction. We stand by our reporting." Now, even some conservatives are saying that Ocasio-Cortez kind of reminds them of Donald Trump with her uncanny knack for drawing media attention, her tendency toward fact challenge comments, and a willingness to pick fights with the press. She accused a Washington Examiner reporter who said her wardrobe didn't match her low-income status of misogyny. Birdcage lining may be her version of fake news. Germany's Der Spiegel has fired a reporter in a massive scandal involving years of fabricated stories and made-up characters. Now, U.S. Ambassador Rick Grinnell has written its top editor demanding an outside investigation of, quote, anti-American bias at the magazine that has exploded since the election of Donald Trump. Grinnell, a former Fox News contributor, says Der Spiegel routinely doesn't call for comment and that the U.S. has lost faith in its editing and fact-checking. Kind of a familiar complaint back home. Ahead on Media Buzz, some prominent journalists canceling their Facebook accounts and the social network recover from this latest ethics calamity. But first, are some liberal commentators going off the deep end when it comes to the president and the Mueller probe? Bill Bennett is next. With the media ripping President Trump for crises that stretch from Washington to Wall Street, I spoke moments ago with Bill Bennett, the former cabinet official, host of the Bill Bennett podcast on iTunes, and author of the new book, The True St. Nicholas, Why He Matters to Christmas. Bill Bennett, welcome.
Thank you.
Here's the media narrative. An unnecessary government shutdown, disastrous Syrian pullout. Jim Mattis was the last adult in the room. Wall Street is plummeting. Complete and utter chaos, and it's all Donald Trump's fault. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, he is the President of the United States, and he's going to attract a lot of attention. But this is a guy who paints in very bold strokes. You could get another president doing the same things, but it wouldn't be done in the Trump style.
Trump style being?
Direct, bold, straightforward, in your face. That's it.
Also, at the center of things, the stories tend to be about him.
Yes.
Both that's partially the media, and that's partially the way the president tweets and invites all that coverage.
Yeah, and I don't want to limit my time and end my segment right away, but they hate Trump. I mean, Trump is the focus. A lot of these guys want to get Trump. I mean, they just don't like him. They'll look at any reason. Let's take one of those pieces, the general. I'm sorry to see Mattis go. I really am sorry to see Mattis go. But I remember all the headlines about too many generals. He was hiring too many generals.
Right.
Oh, one's leaving now, so maybe that, actually two have left.
Well, let's stay with that for a second, because Jim Mattis has served his country well in Afghanistan and Iraq and at the White House. But as somebody who has held a cabinet level post, is the press overplaying the importance of one secretary here? They are. Even though Mattis played a vital role.
They are indeed. And you serve at the pleasure of the president. And, you always got to remind yourself of that. I remember making calls a couple of times. I was the Secretary of Education and drugs are. And I get a call from the Chief of Staff about being unhappy. I said, how unhappy is he? If he's really unhappy, I will go. But, Donald Trump is the center of conversation, not just here in Washington. It's really interesting. He's the center of conversation all over the country. He's leads every parade. I mean, there are conversations at Thanksgiving dinner. People talk about having no politics discussion zone. I've never seen anything like it.
Right. It does seem to sort of dominate every aspect of American life. But when the president abruptly changes course or does something about telling his aides or blindsides his allies, does that add to the sense that everything is about him? In other words, does he have some responsibility here, even if the press is over-dramatizing it at all, for the sense that right now Washington is rattled?
Yes, of course he does, because that's the way he acts, and he acts in this very direct and forceful way, this bold colors way. He doesn't lead in, he doesn't prevaricate, he says what he thinks. What's that line from Coriolanus? I will go to them most counterfeitly. He doesn't go to the public most counterfeitly, he goes quite directly. And the things he does are sudden strikes. But remember just how large he looms, not just in the minds of the American people, but the media, who are both exhausted, by his pace.
Right, because 6 in the morning the tweets start.
Yeah, I love our White House correspondent at Fox, John Roberts, who's always looks like he's working an 18-hour day. That's because Trump is working an 18-hour day. The guy is indefatigable. He's strong. He's direct. No matter what his politics, he would draw a lot of attention. But all the anger has to do with the fact that he's Donald Trump.
But as you were just sort of hinting at, it goes well beyond the world of politics to the world of culture. So you have Trump versus the NFL. You have Trump versus SNL. You have Trump versus social media, Trump versus Hollywood celebrities. Have we ever had a president more at the center of every single political and cultural conversation? And can that be wearing on the public?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. Wearing or wearying. Yeah. Is there a subject in which he has no interest? Is there a subject in which he is not prepared to declaim? Maybe not. Look, he's an interested consumer of the culture, but what he's doing is he's acting more like a regular person than we're used to presidents acting, with scripts and with people explaining it and with very careful language. He talks like someone in your family would talk. I don't like what they're doing in the NFL. I like that song. Why'd they take that sitcom off TV?
And then the press jumps in and says, okay, he's not getting the nuance and he overstated this and this is off, but that's part of his appeal. I often try to remind people of the way that he talks. But he also is not just a voracious consumer of media coverage. He cares a lot about television. The presidents that you work for, do you think they were spending as much time focusing on how they were being played in the media?
Yeah, well, he doesn't cater to the press. He canceled the White House press party this year. He doesn't.
People thought that was fine.
He doesn't go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I think that's great because he doesn't cater to them. They know he doesn't like them. He knows they don't like him. But you're right. No, he's a huge cultural figure, and not just here, but around the world. These conversations take place about Donald Trump. Better known than Nike, I was told the other day.
During this partial government
McDonald's.
Well, that's head spinning.
Yeah,
during this partial government shutdown, Washington Post headline: one among many, Limbaugh and Coulter blamed for Trump's shutdown. Suddenly, conservative commentators, of which you have been one, you're an author, you hosted a radio show, have so much power they can tell the president what to do in this new meme because they objected to the initial compromise that would have averted a shutdown, but also had zero funding for the border wall.
Yeah, well, look, he listens.
That powerful?
They're powerful. He listens to people whom he likes and who have generally agreed with him, and that's perfectly fine, but he makes his own decision. Press needs to make up its mind here. Is it Limbaugh? Is it Ann Coulter? Is it Laura Ingraham? Or is it Donald Trump? Well, maybe there are a lot of conservatives with opinions and strong opinions, but we've never had a president like him, and for all those who complain for years after year in the press that it's too staged, it's too phony, it's too artificial. This is not an artificial presidency.
Last question, I've got about half a minute. You said a moment ago that he does not like the press does not like Donald Trump. Is there a level on which that is not a good thing for the country, this constant warfare?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this it seeps through the air vents. It troubles people, but at the end of the day, what matters to people is whether things get done, whether their individual lives are better, and I think he's making a very good case on that front. So we'll see. American people can stand a lot more than people think. We're not delicate flowers. We can handle it.
No delicate flower here. Bill Bennett, thanks very much for a great conversation.
Thank you,
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
After the break, a closer look at Jim Mattis leaving the Pentagon. Was he pushed out or did he quit? And coverage of the president's decision to pull out of Syria. And later, Facebook breaches your privacy again, and the company isn't sorry.